When wealthy neighbors ganged up to destroy her life over a simple garden, they had no idea they were about to discover who she really was married to. What happened next will leave you speechless and prove that karma has perfect timing. Emma Martinez had always believed that kindness would be returned in equal measure. At 28, she possessed the sort of gentle optimism that made strangers smile and children gravitate toward her during neighborhood walks. Her honey-colored hair caught sunlight as she tended to her modest front garden, and her laugh had a musical quality that drifted through open windows on warm afternoons. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. She was the kind of person who remembered birthdays, brought soup to sick neighbors, and never forgot to wave at the elderly man who sat on his porch each morning. The small two-bedroom house on Maple Street had been her sanctuary for 3 years. It wasn't much by most standards: vinyl siding that needed touch-ups, a front porch that creaked in certain spots, and a driveway with cracks that collected rainwater. But Emma had transformed it into something beautiful through sheer determination and creativity. She painted the shutters a cheerful yellow, planted wildflowers along the walkway, and hung wind chimes that sang gentle melodies when evening breezes stirred. Her neighbors had been cordial enough when she first moved in. Pleasant waves, brief conversations about weather, the occasional borrowed cup of sugar. Maple Street was a mixed neighborhood, some modest homes like hers, others sprawling properties with manicured lawns and luxury cars parked in circular driveways. Emma had assumed that variety was what made communities interesting. Working as a kindergarten teacher at Lincoln Elementary, Emma earned enough to cover her mortgage and basic expenses, with little left over for luxuries. She shopped at thrift stores, grew vegetables in her backyard, and found joy in simple pleasures like library books and homemade coffee. Her colleagues often marveled at her ability to stretch $1 while maintaining such infectious positivity. The trouble began 6 months ago when the Hendersons moved into the mansion directly across from her house. Richard Henderson was a prominent real estate developer whose projects dotted the city skyline, while his wife Patricia headed several exclusive charity organizations. Their teenage daughter Madison attended the private academy downtown, and their son Blake was completing his MBA at an expensive university. Within weeks of their arrival, Emma noticed subtle changes in the neighborhood dynamics. The Hendersons' friends drove cars that cost more than Emma's annual salary, and their weekend gatherings drew couples dressed in designer clothing who spoke in clipped, precise tones about stock portfolios and vacation homes in the Hamptons. Emma continued her routine of morning jogs, evening garden work, and friendly waves to anyone she encountered. She helped Mrs. Chen next door carry groceries, offered to water plants for the Johnsons when they traveled, and always picked up stray newspapers that had blown into yards during storms. The first complaint came on a Tuesday morning in March. Emma was planting tulip bulbs along her front border when Patricia Henderson approached, her heels clicking against the sidewalk with military precision. Patricia wore a cream-colored blazer that probably cost more than Emma's monthly grocery budget, and her blonde hair was styled in a way that suggested regular visits to expensive salons. "Excuse me," Patricia said, her voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to immediate attention. "I wanted to discuss your landscaping choices." Emma looked up from her gardening gloves, genuinely puzzled. "My landscaping? Those wildflowers you planted last year," Patricia continued, gesturing toward Emma's front yard. "They're creating quite a problem. The seeds are blowing into our lawn, and my landscaper says they're considered weeds in some circles. It's affecting our property value." Emma blinked in surprise. The wildflowers were native species, black-eyed Susans, purple coneflowers, and bee balm that attracted butterflies and provided food for local wildlife. She had researched each variety carefully, ensuring they would thrive in the local climate while supporting the ecosystem. "I chose native plants specifically because they're beneficial for local wildlife," Emma explained gently. "They require less water and provide food for butterflies and birds." Patricia's smile was sharp and cold. "I'm sure you had good intentions, but this is a respectable neighborhood. We maintain certain standards. Perhaps you could consider something more conventional? My landscaper could recommend some appropriate alternatives." The conversation left Emma feeling unsettled, but she tried to dismiss it as a simple misunderstanding. Patricia was new to the area and probably didn't understand the environmental benefits of native plantings. Emma decided to give her some time to adjust. 2 weeks later, Emma received her first official complaint. A certified letter from the Neighborhood Homeowners Association, which she hadn't even realized existed, informed her that multiple residents had reported, quote, unsightly and inappropriate landscaping that violated community aesthetic standards. Emma read the letter 3 times, her hands trembling slightly. She had never received any official documentation about landscaping requirements when she purchased her home. The letter demanded she remove the wildflowers within 30 days or face daily fines of $50. That evening, Emma walked through her garden with new eyes, trying to see what others found so objectionable. The flowers were healthy and vibrant, attracting bees and butterflies that added life and movement to the space. Children walking to school often stopped to admire the colorful blooms, and she had received compliments from joggers and dog walkers throughout the previous summer. She decided to attend the next Homeowners Association meeting to understand the complaint better. The meeting was held in the Hendersons' spacious living room, which Emma had never seen before. Crystal chandeliers cast elegant light over leather furniture and oil paintings in ornate frames. About 15 neighbors attended, most of whom Emma recognized only in passing. Patricia Henderson called the meeting to order, with the confidence of someone born to leadership roles. She wore a navy dress that emphasized her slim figure, and her jewelry caught the light as she gestured. The agenda included several routine items: snow removal procedures, mailbox maintenance, and community event planning. Then Patricia reached Emma's situation. "We need to address the ongoing landscaping issue on Maple Street," Patricia announced, her gaze finding Emma in the room. "Several residents have expressed concerns about property values and neighborhood aesthetics." Richard Henderson, a tall man with silver hair and an expensive watch, nodded gravely. "When we invested in this community, we expected certain standards to be maintained. Non-conforming landscaping affects everyone's property values." Emma raised her hand tentatively. "I'd like to understand what specific problems my flowers are causing. They're native plants that support local wildlife." "The issue isn't necessarily the plants themselves," Patricia replied, though her tone suggested otherwise. "It's about community cohesion and maintaining standards that protect everyone's investments." Mrs. Carlton, an elderly woman who lived 2 streets over, spoke up. "I think Emma's garden is lovely. It attracts the most beautiful butterflies." Patricia's smile tightened. "Of course, we all appreciate nature, but there's a time and place for everything. This is a residential neighborhood, not a nature preserve." The discussion continued for 20 minutes, with most residents staying silent while a few voiced support for community standards. Emma left the meeting feeling isolated and confused. She had tried to be a good neighbor, yet somehow her efforts to beautify her property were being seen as destructive. Over the following weeks, the complaints escalated. Someone reported her for hanging laundry on a line in her backyard, claiming it was, quote, unsightly. Another complaint accused her of allowing her garbage bins to remain visible from the street for more than the prescribed time limit. A third complaint cited her for parking her modest sedan in her own driveway because it was inconsistent with neighborhood vehicle standards. Emma began to realize that her wildflowers had been just the beginning. The Hendersons and their allies were systematically targeting every aspect of her life that didn't align with their vision of suburban perfection. The harassment intensified when Patricia Henderson organized what she called a, quote, community beautification initiative. Flyers appeared in mailboxes throughout the neighborhood, featuring professionally photographed images of manicured lawns and pristine landscapes. The flyers mentioned the importance of maintaining property values through consistent aesthetic choices, and included a subtle reference to, quote, problem properties that dragged down the entire community. Emma found one of these flyers in her mailbox on a rainy Thursday morning. Her hands shook as she read the thinly veiled accusations, and she felt tears prick her eyes. She had never wanted to be a problem for anyone. That afternoon, she received a call from her principal, Mrs. Rodriguez, asking her to come in for a meeting. Emma's stomach dropped as she wondered if the neighborhood complaints had somehow reached her workplace. "Emma, I wanted to check in with you," Mrs. Rodriguez said kindly as they sat in her office. "I received an unusual call today from someone claiming to represent your neighborhood association. They suggested there were concerns about your stability as a teacher." Emma felt the blood drain from her face. "My stability?" Of course, I told them that your personal life was none of their business and that you were one of our most dedicated teachers," Mrs. Rodriguez continued. "But I wanted you to know about the call in case there's something I can help you with." Emma realized that Patricia Henderson wasn't content to make her life difficult at home. She was trying to damage her professionally as well. The attack felt deeply personal and calculated, designed to undermine every aspect of Emma's security. That weekend, Emma decided to take a different approach. She researched neighborhood covenants and homeowners association bylaws, looking for some legal protection against the escalating harassment. What she discovered was troubling. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The Homeowners Association had been formed only 8 months earlier, just after the Hendersons moved in, and its rules had been designed with surgical precision to target properties like hers. The bylaws required lawn maintenance by certified landscaping companies, prohibited vegetable gardens in front yards, mandated specific paint colors for homes, and established minimum property values for vehicles parked in driveways. Every rule seemed crafted to exclude families with modest incomes from the neighborhood. Emma also learned that Patricia Henderson had been elected president of the association in an election where only 12 residents had voted, most of them from the expensive houses on the north side of the neighborhood. Armed with this information, Emma decided to fight back. She hired a lawyer using money from her emergency savings account, hoping to challenge the legitimacy of the association's retroactive rules. The lawyer, Ms. Thompson, was sympathetic but realistic about Emma's chances. "These cases are difficult," Ms. Thompson explained during their consultation. "Homeowners associations have broad authority, and courts generally defer to their judgment unless there's clear evidence of discrimination. But they formed the association specifically to target people like me," Emma protested. "Proving that will be challenging. They've been careful to write rules that appear neutral on their surface, even if their effect is discriminatory." Emma left the lawyer's office feeling defeated but determined. She couldn't afford a lengthy legal battle, but she also couldn't afford to lose her home to escalating fines and harassment. The situation reached a breaking point on a sunny Saturday morning in early June. Emma was working in her garden, deadheading flowers and pulling weeds, when she noticed Patricia Henderson approaching with several other neighbors in tow. Richard Henderson was there, along with the Carlyles from the corner house and Dr. Peterson from the medical practice downtown. "Emma," Patricia called out in a voice that carried across the street, drawing attention from other neighbors who were outside enjoying the pleasant weather. "We need to have a serious conversation." Emma stood up slowly, brushing dirt from her knees. She wore old jeans and a faded t-shirt, and suddenly felt acutely aware of how different she looked from the group approaching her. Patricia wore white slacks and a silk blouse that probably cost more than Emma's monthly car payment, while the other women sported designer athleisure and expensive jewelry. "Of course," Emma replied, trying to keep her voice steady. "What can I do for you?" Patricia smiled, but there was no warmth in the expression. "We've been more than patient about the ongoing issues with your property, but I'm afraid the situation has become untenable." Dr. Peterson stepped forward, his voice carrying the authority of his professional status. "The Homeowners Association has received numerous complaints about noise, property maintenance, and general disruption to neighborhood harmony." Emma looked confused. "Noise? I don't understand. I work during the day and I'm usually in bed by 10 o'clock. Your lawnmower," Richard Henderson said curtly. "You use it at inappropriate times, and it's one of those old, loud models that disturbs the peace." Emma's lawnmower was indeed old, a push mower she had bought used because it was all she could afford. She used it on Saturday mornings, typically around 9 o'clock, which seemed reasonable for weekend yard work. "I mow on Saturday mornings," Emma said carefully. "I thought that was appropriate." "Saturday morning is when people want to sleep in and enjoy their leisure time," Patricia replied. "Professional landscaping services work on weekdays when most people are at work." The group had positioned themselves in a semicircle around Emma, and she began to feel trapped. Several other neighbors had emerged from their houses, drawn by the commotion, and she realized she was becoming the center of a public spectacle. "There's also the matter of your visitors," Mrs. Carlyle added, speaking for the first time. "That friend of yours parks her car in front of our house sometimes." Emma thought of Sarah, her college roommate who visited occasionally for dinner or movie nights. Sarah drove a compact car and always parked legally on the public street, sometimes in front of the Carlyle house if the space in front of Emma's house was occupied. "Sarah parks on a public street," Emma said, feeling her cheeks grow warm. "I believe that's legal. Legal, perhaps, but inconsiderate, Dr. Peterson replied. This is a quiet residential area. We don't expect frequent visitors from outside the community. The phrase stung because Emma understood its implication. Sarah was black, and Emma suddenly wondered if the complaints about her friend's visits were about more than parking. I think there's been a misunderstanding, Emma said, her voice stronger now. I try to be respectful of everyone. If there are specific problems, I'd be happy to address them. Patricia's smile became even more condescending. Emma, I think you're missing the bigger picture here. This neighborhood has a certain character, a certain standard of living that residents expect to maintain. Your presence here has been disruptive to that harmony. The words hit Emma like a physical blow. Patricia wasn't just complaining about flowers or parking. She was suggesting that Emma didn't belong in the neighborhood at all. I own my home, Emma said quietly. I pay my taxes and follow the law. I try to be a good neighbor. Of course you do, Patricia replied, her tone suggesting the opposite. But sometimes good intentions aren't enough. Sometimes what's best for the community requires individual sacrifice. Richard Henderson stepped closer, his voice dropping to what he probably thought was a reasonable tone. We're prepared to make you an offer for your property. Fair market value, quick closing, no complications. You could find something more suitable to your circumstances. Emma stared at him in shock. They wanted her to sell her house and leave the neighborhood entirely. This is my home, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Think about it practically, Dr. Peterson added. You're obviously struggling to maintain the property to community standards. The fines are only going to increase. Wouldn't it be easier to find somewhere more affordable? The group stood there, waiting for her response, and Emma realized that this wasn't really a conversation. It was an ultimatum delivered with witnesses to ensure maximum humiliation. They wanted her to break down, to agree to their demands in front of the entire neighborhood. Emma felt tears threatening, but she refused to give them the satisfaction of seeing her cry. She looked around at the faces surrounding her, some hostile, some merely curious, none offering support. I need to think about this, she managed to say. Patricia's smile was triumphant. Of course, take all the time you need, but remember, the fines continue to accumulate every day you delay compliance with association standards. The group dispersed, leaving Emma standing alone in her front yard, feeling more isolated and defeated than she had ever felt in her life. Neighbors who had watched the confrontation began returning to their houses, some shaking their heads in what might have been sympathy or disapproval. Emma couldn't tell which. She walked inside her house and closed the door, leaning against it as tears finally came. For the first time since moving to Maple Street, Emma wondered if Patricia Henderson was right. Maybe she didn't belong here. Maybe the fight wasn't worth the cost. Outside, she could hear the distant sound of a lawn service starting work on the Henderson property, the expensive equipment humming smoothly as uniformed workers maintained the perfect grass that had become the neighborhood standard. Emma slid down the door until she was sitting on the floor, wondering how her simple dream of homeownership had turned into such a nightmare, and whether she had the strength to keep fighting for the place she had tried so hard to call home. Emma sat on her kitchen floor for what felt like hours, staring at the stack of homeowner association violation notices piling up on her counter. Each fine represented another $50 she couldn't afford, another step closer to losing everything she had worked for. The house felt different now, less like a sanctuary, and more like a prison she was trapped inside. 3 days passed in a blur of anxiety and sleepless nights. Emma called in sick to work, unable to face her students while feeling so broken inside. She avoided her windows, not wanting to see the neighbors who had made their position clear. The isolation was suffocating, but the alternative, facing their judgmental stares and whispered conversations, felt worse. On Thursday morning, Emma forced herself to shower and dress for work. She couldn't hide forever, and her kindergartners needed her. As she gathered her teaching materials, she noticed an unusual amount of activity across the street. Multiple black SUVs were parked in front of the Henderson house, and men in expensive suits were walking up the driveway carrying briefcases and tablets. Emma tried not to stare as she loaded her car, but the scene was impossible to ignore. Patricia Henderson stood on her front porch, gesturing animatedly to someone Emma couldn't see. Her usual composure seemed strained, and even from a distance, Emma could tell something significant was happening. At school, Emma threw herself into lesson plans and art projects. grateful for the distraction her students provided. Their innocent laughter and endless questions reminded her why she loved teaching, why she had chosen a profession that prioritized nurturing over profit. During lunch, her phone buzzed with a text from Mrs. Chen, her elderly neighbor. "Something big happening on the street today. Multiple cars, official-looking people. Thought you should know." Emma's stomach knotted with fresh anxiety. Had the homeowner association escalated their complaints to city officials? Were they trying to have her house condemned or declared a nuisance property? The possibilities swirled through her mind as she tried to focus on her afternoon reading group. When Emma arrived home that evening, the mysterious vehicles were gone, but an unusual quiet had settled over the neighborhood. No children played in yards, no lawn services hummed in the distance. Even the Henderson house, usually bustling with activity, appeared strangely still. Emma parked in her driveway and noticed Patricia Henderson standing at her mailbox, her face pale and her usual confident demeanor noticeably absent. Their eyes met across the street, and Patricia quickly looked away, hurrying back toward her house with uncharacteristic haste. As Emma walked toward her front door, she saw Mrs. Chen peeking through her curtains. The elderly woman opened her door slightly and beckoned Emma over with urgent gestures. "You need to know what happened today," Mrs. Chen whispered, glancing around as if worried about being overheard. "Those weren't just any officials. They were from some big corporation, lawyers and executives. They spent 3 hours at the Henderson house." "What kind of corporation?" Emma asked, confused. "Real estate development, I think. But here's the strange part. They weren't there to do business with Richard Henderson. They were there to deliver news. Bad news, from the look of it." Mrs. Chen paused dramatically, clearly relishing her role as neighborhood informant. "Word is that Henderson's company is in serious financial trouble. Those violations he's been writing up for everyone? Turns out his own business practices weren't so clean." Emma felt a mixture of surprise and cautious hope. Could the tables finally be turning? "There's more," Mrs. Chen continued. "Someone bought the Johnson property this afternoon. Cash sale closed in 2 hours. The Johnsons have been trying to sell for 6 months, and suddenly they get an offer they couldn't refuse. The Johnson house was 3 doors down from Emma's, a modest ranch similar to her own. If someone was buying properties in the neighborhood, it could mean gentrification was accelerating, pushing out families like hers even faster. That night, Emma barely slept. Every car that passed seemed to slow down near her house. Every sound outside made her wonder if more bad news was coming. She had almost drifted off around midnight when her doorbell rang. Emma's heart raced as she approached the front door. Through the peephole, she saw a tall man in a dark suit standing under her porch light. He appeared to be alone, but something about his posture suggested authority and importance. "Ms. Martinez," the man said when she cracked the door open, keeping the chain latch engaged. "My name is David Mitchell. I represent Stone Development Corporation. I apologize for the late hour, but I have something important to discuss with you." Emma's mind raced. Another corporation, another offer to buy her house, another attempt to force her out of the neighborhood. "I'm not interested in selling," she said firmly. David Mitchell smiled, and his expression was surprisingly kind. "Actually, I'm not here to make you an offer. I'm here to inform you of changes that will affect your living situation." Emma's stomach dropped. Had the homeowner association found a way to force her out through legal means? What kind of changes? "May I come in?" This conversation would be better held privately. Against her better judgment, Emma unlatched the chain and opened the door. David Mitchell entered her living room, glancing around with what seemed like appreciation rather than judgment. He was younger than she had initially thought, perhaps in his early 30s, with intelligent eyes and an expensive watch that caught the lamplight. "Ms. Martinez, I need to share some information that might come as a shock," he began, settling into the chair she offered. "Stone Development Corporation purchased 14 properties in this neighborhood today, including the entire Henderson estate." Emma stared at him in confusion. "I don't understand. What does that have to do with me?" David Mitchell reached into his briefcase and withdrew a folder thick with documents. The corporation's owner has been monitoring the situation in this neighborhood for several weeks. He became aware of the harassment you've been experiencing and decided to take action. Someone was monitoring the harassment? Emma asked, feeling even more confused. Yes. You see, the owner of Stone Development Corporation has a personal interest in your welfare. A very personal interest. David Mitchell opened the folder and pulled out a photograph. Emma's breath caught in her throat as she recognized the image. It was her wedding photo from 2 years ago, the small ceremony she had shared with only a handful of family members and close friends. "I think there's been a mistake," Emma whispered, though her heart was already beginning to understand what her mind couldn't quite process. "No mistake, Mrs. Stone," David Mitchell said gently. "Your husband has been watching this situation unfold, and he's decided it's time to stop hiding who you're married to." Emma felt the room spin around her. She gripped the arm of her chair, trying to process what she was hearing. James? James Stone? James Alexander Stone, CEO of Stone Development Corporation, worth approximately $8 billion, and according to these documents, your husband of 2 years. The truth hit Emma like a tidal wave. James, her quiet, private James, who worked in technology consulting and traveled frequently for business. James, who insisted on keeping their marriage private because he valued his anonymity. James, who deposited money into her account each month that she assumed was his modest contribution to their shared expenses. "He's been watching?" Emma asked, her voice barely audible. "He received detailed reports about every homeowner association meeting, every violation notice, every attempt to intimidate you into selling. He wanted to see if you could handle the pressure, if you would compromise your values for an easier life." Emma felt a surge of anger mixed with relief. "He was testing me?" David Mitchell shook his head. "Not testing, protecting. James has learned to be cautious about people's motivations. He needed to know that you loved him for who he is, not what he owns. Your behavior these past months proved exactly what he hoped, that you're the same genuine person he fell in love with. But why didn't he help me? I was losing everything." "You were never going to lose anything," David Mitchell assured her. "James has been prepared to intervene from the beginning. But he also knew that you needed to see your own strength, to understand that you don't need rescuing. You're perfectly capable of standing up for yourself." David Mitchell pulled out another set of documents. "As of this afternoon, James owns this entire block except for your house and Mrs. Chen's. He's terminated the homeowner association, voided all violation notices, and filed formal complaints against Richard Henderson for harassment and discriminatory practices." Emma's mind reeled as she tried to process the magnitude of what was happening. "The Hendersons?" "Richard Henderson's company has been under federal investigation for months. James simply accelerated the timeline by providing evidence of his personal conduct. The Hendersons received an eviction notice this morning." "Eviction?" "But they own their house." "Not anymore. Turns out their mortgage was fraudulently obtained using falsified income statements. James bought the debt from their bank and called it due immediately." Emma felt a mixture of shock and satisfaction. Patricia Henderson, who had made her life miserable for months, was about to experience her own downfall. David Mitchell stood up, gathering his documents. "James will be home tomorrow morning. He's been in Tokyo finalizing a merger, but he caught the first flight out when he decided it was time to end this charade." "Home?" Emma asked. "Here, to his wife, to the house he bought you as a wedding gift, to the life you've been building together." After David Mitchell left, Emma sat in her living room, surrounded by the same modest furniture and thrift store decorations that Patricia Henderson had mocked. Tomorrow, everything would change. The neighbors who had treated her like an unwanted intruder would discover that she was married to the most powerful man in the city. But tonight, Emma realized something important. She had never needed James's money or status to be worthy of respect. She had always been enough, exactly as she was. The flowers in her garden, her kindness to neighbors, her dedication to her students, these things had value that couldn't be measured in dollars or status symbols. As she prepared for bed, Emma looked out her window at the Henderson house, where lights still burned despite the late hour. Tomorrow, Patricia Henderson would learn what it felt like to be powerless, to have her life upended by forces beyond her control. But Emma would face tomorrow with the same grace and dignity she had shown throughout this ordeal. She was still a kindergarten teacher who loved children and flowers and simple pleasures. She was still the same person who believed in kindness and community. The only difference was that now everyone would know. She was also Mrs. James Stone, and her husband had just bought their entire world. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.